Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is a channel for educational edification, and we take a look at great theories of everything, ancient and modern, and try to figure out how to best use these things in our own lives for our paradigm shifting, our awakening to 5D consciousness, and our formation of a holistic worldview. Today is our 547th video on the reciprocal system of theory from Dewey B. Larson. And Mr. Larson believed that the universe was made out of motion, not matter, not energy, but motion. And that wasn't his original contribution. Other scientists had arrived at that conclusion in the past, like Rene Descartes and Thomas Hobbes, Arthur Eddington, and others. But Larson made it stick a little bit better because he defined motion as the relationship between space and time. Speed, for example. I was riding my bike at 20 miles per hour. 20 miles of space in 1 hour of time. Space over time is speed. That is a relationship between space and time. But Larson expanded that not only to just speed, but all of our scientific quantities are forms of motion. So matter is a form of motion. Energy is a form of motion. Pressure is a form of motion. Electric charge is a form of motion. And they all can be expressed in a fraction, with space or time as the numerator and time or space as the denominator, with the idea that both space and time can have multiple exponents. So force is time over space to the second power. Matter is time to the third power over space to the third power. Pressure is time over space to the fourth power. Acceleration is space over time to the second power. And so on. Now, Larson also used a broader definition when he was talking about motion. He's in particular talking about what we call scalar motion. A scalar motion is a motion that has a magnitude, but it has no specific direction. So you can envision a scalar motion with a balloon that you put dots on with a magic marker. As you blow up the balloon, all the dots are moving away from each other, but not in any specific direction, just outward, away from each other. Every dot is moving away from every other dot. So every dot is moving in every direction, outward. And if you contract the balloon, then every dot will be moving in every direction inward. So it's either inward or outward. These are the two fundamental motions of Larson's system. The outward motion he calls the progression, and the inward motion, gravitation. And the progression is always existing, always and everywhere, omnipresent and eternal, existing at all times, at all places. And it's existing at a speed of 1 unit of space per 1 unit of time. Larson calls that the progression of the natural reference system. And that is the source of everything in the universe. And that source is manifested by reversing it and turning that outward motion of the balloon to an inward motion, turning the progression into gravitation, which is tantamount to matter. So matter comes about through reversing that progression through a process of first what he calls a rotational base, and then a photon, and then subatoms, and then atoms. And in Larson's system, everything is quantized, so everything is whole numbers, and everything is in 3 dimensions. Motion, space, time, and motion are in 3 dimensions and in discrete units. And space and time are related in a reciprocal manner, like in a fraction. So, for example, I'm riding my bike at 20 miles per hour, 20 miles of space in 1 hour of time. Say I decide to go really, really fast and double my speed. So I can now say the bicycle is now moving at 40 miles per hour. So I can double the space. But equivalently, I could also say that the bicycle is now moving at 20 miles per half hour. It's the same thing. You can either multiply the space by 2, or you can divide the time by 2 and get the same result. That is a reciprocal relationship between space and time. That's why he calls it the reciprocal system of theory, otherwise known as the universe of motion. Now, Larson took that fundamental postulate and plugged it into his second fundamental postulate, which is that the universe the universe conforms to the relations of ordinary commutative mathematics. Its primary magnitudes are absolute, and its geometry is Euclidean. And from those two, he arrived at a theoretical universe, what his universe would look like if his postulates were correct. And then he compared his theoretical universe with the empirical measured universe of modern science that they compile in their scientific tables and such like, and ended up writing books such as Basic Properties of Matter, which we've covered on this channel, which is on chemistry. And so Larson theoretically arrives at values for many of the basic properties of matter, like the melting point or the specific heat or the compressibility of different atoms and compounds, and then compares his results to the scientific tables. In many cases, Larson is able to practically reproduce the scientific tables that they had arrived at over the centuries through many expensive hours of laboratory study. Larson was able to do them on his living room chair with a slide rule, and mostly coming right out of his head for free, or minimal cost. And Larson not only has books on physics and chemistry and astrophysics and astronomy, but he also has a book on metaphysics, which includes philosophy, religion, biology, psychology, and so really trying to apply his theory to as many different subjects as he can to show how it is a generalized theory of the universe and can be harnessed to answer all your questions, regardless of what they are, as long as you understand the system and know how to apply it. And so Larson also has 2 books on economics. And we're looking at one of those books today. It's called The Road to Permanent Prosperity. The other book on economics is called The Road to Full Employment. And we are in chapter 12 of this book, toward the beginning, about a third of the way through. The chapter is called Money Inflation. We're going to get started on that in just a second. I just wanted to say what he's doing here. Larson is really introducing the idea of econophysics to economics, and he is opposed to the idea of sociological economics, or at least put it back into its place. Policy decisions, political, ideological, philosophical economics, where you're concerned with your particular social issue, and writing your economics based on that. Larson says that that's not a good first principle for economics. Economics is like building a bridge. It has to comply with the laws of physics. And if you build your economic system not in compliance with the laws of physics, then it will collapse. And, many things that are kind of economically mainstream these days are very much in the realm of collapsing, not in compliance with the laws of physics. One thing that he talks about also in this chapter is the something for nothing approach to economics, where you can just print more money, or you can just raise the minimum wage. These are things that it's what you would call a something for nothing approach. Larson says that the iron law of economics is work or starve. You have to produce something. And so if you set up your economics where you have make work, you reward people for doing useless work, that is a broken system. You have to produce something in order to be able to consume something. Those are the two fundamental aspects of economics: production and consumption. Those are the reciprocal aspects, just like space and time are in the world of science. So that's just a little bit on Larson's ideas. He has 17 different principles that he says are scientifically exact, that he plugs into his economic system, and he has a chart, a flow chart, that he shows the flow of the economic system. Hopefully I'll put that onto the thumbnail so you can take a look at that. And we're going to just get started here. Now, if you'd like to have a little bit more of an overview of the reciprocal system, watch one of my first 474 videos on this subject in the playlist. Or if you want to learn more about Larson's whole system, starting from the beginning, the economics, starting from the beginning of this book, go back 3 or 4 weeks in the archives and start with chapter 1. But right now we're in chapter 12, Money Inflation. One of the major reasons for the existing chaos and confusion in current inflation theory is that the difference between cost inflation and money inflation is not generally understood. As A.P. Lerner says, quote, "A failure to distinguish between the two types of inflation aggravates a problem which has become a serious threat to democratic society. The two kinds of inflation originate from different causes. Their effects are different, the arguments for eliminating them are different, and the measures that are required for this purpose are different. In spite of the general apprehension about the so-called wage price spiral, cost inflation is not a major economic problem. Increases in wages or other elements of production cost alter the relation between fixed obligations and the general price level, and therefore alter the value balance in existing commitments, favoring some groups of individuals at the expense of others, and thus creating a social problem. When wage increases are negotiated piecemeal and unsystematically in accordance with present practice, they also result in serious inequities between different groups of workers, another social problem. But inflation or deflation originating from wage increases does not affect the ability of the consuming public as a whole to buy goods. Whatever increases take place as a result of these changes are counterbalanced by a corresponding increase in the available money purchasing power resulting from the higher wages. Furthermore, the cause of this type of inflation, too much liberality in granting the wage increases, is well known, and the cure is obvious, even though it is politically unpopular as matters now stand, in the absence of a clear understanding of what is going on. The serious threat to democratic society is money inflation. Unlike cost inflation, this is an unbalanced transaction. The equality between the quantity of goods in one economic stream and the quantity of money in the other, which is always maintained at the production end of the mechanism, no longer exists when these streams reach the goods market, because the reservoir transactions along the way introduce or withdraw money from the auxiliary stream without altering the stream of goods. Let us consider, by way of illustration, a situation in which an isolated community has a total annual production valued at $1 million. The suppliers of capital and labor and capital services receive from the producers money equivalent to the total value of the products, $1 million. And this is exactly the amount which these suppliers of labor and capital services, in their capacity as consumers, need in order to buy the full amount of the annual production at the normal price level, the price level determined at the production end of the mechanism. Now let us assume that the government issues an additional $500,000 in currency and uses this new money for purchases in the goods market. So far as the markets are concerned, this $500,000 is indistinguishable from the $1 million of money purchasing power generated by production. And we therefore find that $1.5 million are competing in the market for goods originally valued at only $1 million. The result is inflation. Unless there is an offsetting input into some money reservoir, the price level goes up 50%. If the government uses part or all of the new money to pay wages and salaries rather than to purchase goods, the ultimate effect is the same. Normally, the government sells its services to the consumers directly or indirectly, just as any other producer of services does, and the taxes that the consumers pay have the same economic function as the payments that they make to the other producers for the services that they receive. When the government is operating on the basis of a balanced budget, its expenditures for labor and the services of capital are equal to the receipts from taxes and other income sources, and the net resultant is zero, as it is for the private producer. In this case, the effect of the government operations neither adds nor subtracts from the amount of money available for the purchase of other goods in the markets. But if the government pays the suppliers of labor and capital services with new money instead of collecting taxes, the total money flowing to the markets is increased by the amount of the new currency issued. The result is that the price level is inflated to the same degree as if the new money were used for direct purchase of goods. It is frequently contended that the inflation would not occur if the new money were used exclusively for buying goods that result from additional production, since the increased volume of goods would offset the increased amount of purchasing power. Those who argue along these lines are overlooking the fact that the new production creates its own purchasing power. If additional goods valued at $500,000 are produced as a result of the transactions we are now considering, $500,000 is paid to those who supply the labor and capital services for the production of the additional goods, and this amount adds to the total available purchasing power. We then have $2 million available for buying $1.5 million worth of goods. The percentage effect on the price level is now somewhat less severe. The rise is only 33% instead of 50% because of the greater total production over which the inflationary effect is spread. But the inflationary gap, the excess of money purchasing power over the available goods, is still the entire $500,000 of the new currency issue. No one was particularly surprised that inflation occurred during World War II in spite of the OPA and its much advertised price control measures. But there was a general belief, not only among the rank and file, but among economists, business leaders, and government officials as well, that when the guns were finally silenced and the productive machinery of the nation could be reconverted to the ways of peace, any further threat of runaway prices would be overwhelmed by the torrent of goods that would pour forth from our farms and factories. Here again, as in the forecast of the employment situation, the authorities were consistently wrong. There was not the unanimous agreement on the wrong answer that featured the estimates of post-war unemployment, but the great majority of the experts concurred. As in the case of employment, this clearly indicates that something more than mere errors of judgment was involved. The results could not be so uniformly off-color unless there was some flaw in the accepted premises on which the judgments were based. The nature of this flaw is readily apparent when we take a look at the excuses that are being offered for the poor showing made by these forecasts. On every hand, we meet the contention that inflation occurred because production did not increase fast enough. It is admitted that reconversion to civilian production moved ahead much more swiftly and smoothly than was anticipated. Unemployment was far below the estimates, and aside from some labor troubles and disagreement over price policies, the industrial machine rapidly shifted into high gear. Even if there were sometimes 1 million men out on strike, there were anywhere from 5 to 10 million other men that were supposed to be idle according to the estimates of these same experts. This means that the production in the immediate post-war period was substantially greater than the forecasters expected. Yet we are now told that their price predictions went astray because of the failure of the industrial machine to produce goods quickly in sufficient quantities. With the benefit of the economic principles developed in this work, it can easily be seen how the experts got themselves into this untenable position. In reality, it would make no difference whether the volume of production was as low as the authorities estimated in advance or as high as they now think would have been necessary. We would still have had inflation in either case, inasmuch as the volume of production has no bearing on inflation. Principle 9. The cause of the inflation immediately following the end of the war was an excess of available money purchasing power. It is probably hard for many persons to accustom themselves to the idea that there can be too much money purchasing power. It seems so simple to take care of any excess by producing more goods for sale. While the worst of the post-World War II inflation was underway, we were continually exhorted to strive for greater production in order that there might be goods for the people to buy with their backlog of savings. But extra production, however great it may be, creates its own purchasing power. Every additional dollar's worth of goods produced adds $1 to the total purchasing power available for buying goods, and the inflationary surplus remains undiminished. Maximum production is a worthwhile aim, but it is not a remedy for inflation. The inflationary unbalance can be corrected only where it originates, in the money reservoir transactions. The inflationary results are the same regardless of the type of money reservoir transaction that is involved. Purchasing power obtained in any manner other than production can be utilized only by diverting goods away from those who are entitled to receive them in exchange for their productive services. The community as a whole cannot get something for nothing. And when any individual or group or the government itself gets something for nothing by reason of one of those money purchasing power transactions that we have called reservoir withdrawals, someone else pays the bill by getting nothing for something. From the standpoint of the general public, money inflation is simply a form of taxation, one which is, in a sense, dishonest, because its true character is largely concealed by the indirect manner in which it takes effect. Furthermore, the burden of this type of inflation falls heavily on some segments of the population, while others are practically untouched. Owners of real estate, stocks or goods, or shares in corporate property holders escape with little or no cost, as the real value of this property remains constant, and its money value therefore rises as the inflation progresses. Organized workers who are able to force compensatory wage increases suffer only to a minor degree, and many business enterprises make handsome profits out of the inflationary price rise. Most of the weight of this discriminatory tax bears down on the less favorably situated workers and on the recipients of fixed incomes. When we face the issue squarely, inflationary fiscal policy is a costly economic blunder, but governments which must face elections are, as a rule, favorably disposed toward increasing expenditures, and at the same time notoriously reluctant to levy enough taxes to balance their accounts, an attitude in which they are encouraged by an influential school of economic theorists who see virtue in living on credit. As a result, inflation has become, to a considerable extent, a way of life in most nations. As matters now stand, it is not only a serious threat to democratic society, but also a serious threat to general world stability. Viewed from the purchasing power standpoint, with due consideration of the dominant position of the consumer reservoirs, the causes of money inflation and its effects on the general operation of the economic system are actually very simple, and no extended discussion of the theoretical situation should be necessary. It may be helpful, however, to examine some of the current errors and misconceptions about the subject in the light of the new information that is now available. The most serious error into which the economists have fallen, so far as their understanding of inflation is concerned, is their repudiation of Say's law and substitution of the concept of an essentially autonomous demand for goods in general. It is this fallacy of the autonomous demand that has opened the door to today's weird assortment of inflation-producing schemes and has muddied the waters to such an extent that the economic profession is ready and willing to give respectful attention to such outrageous ideas as Galbraith's proposal that we should find a substitute for production as a source of income, or Hanson's equally outrageous suggestion contained in the following statement that cutting employment would overcome excess demand and lead to price stability. And I believe this is a quote then from Hanson. Following the Second World War, we had, as we all know, a considerable price rise. The closets were empty, the shelves were bare, consumer stocks and business inventories had to be replenished. Under these circumstances, price stability could not have been achieved unless, indeed, we had been prepared to cut employment and income sufficiently to reduce demand to the level of the then available flow of consumers' goods." End quote. If Say's law had not been jettisoned by the economic profession, the almost incredible blunder of forgetting that cutting employment reduces the production of goods could not have occurred. As originally interpreted, Say's law was inaccurate, to be sure, since it is not actually a law of markets, as it was assumed to be, but a law of production. Nevertheless, any attempt at a critical analysis would have revealed what was needed in the way of a modification of the law to make it accurate. Indeed, some economists have come very close to stating the true facts, even without making a thorough analysis. GLS Shackle, for instance, makes this comment, quote, "If goods are in fact bought and sold for money, and a money stock exists in the economy, it seems plain that money can be withdrawn from the stock and used on the commodity market, thus upsetting Say's law." End quote. It should be equally clear that this withdrawal of money from stock is something of a totally different nature from creating purchasing power by production of goods. At this point, therefore, it should have been evident that Say's law is correct so far as the relation of the production of goods to the creation of purchasing power is concerned, and that it is the variations in the storage of money, the reservoir inputs and withdrawals, as we are calling them in this work, that are interfering with the application of the law to the goods markets. But the economists have insisted on taking the stand that Say's law is incorrect, rather than recognizing that in reality it is a correct law incorrectly applied. A significant point in this connection is that each economist who feels called upon to explain what is wrong with Say's law usually comes up with his own interpretation of what the law really means. Here are some examples. Quote, "Thus, Say's law that the aggregate demand price of output as a whole is equal to the aggregate supply price for all volumes of output is equivalent to the proposition that there is no obstacle to full employment." End quote. Another one, "If Say's law is meant to be applicable to the real world, therefore it states that the impossibility of an excess demand for money. It states the impossibility of an excess demand for money." And one more, "The doctrine that supply creates its own demand, in other words, is based on the assumption that a proper equilibrium exists among the different kinds of production and among prices of different products and services." Okay, that will do it for today. We will finish this chapter tomorrow, hopefully, and move on the way. So thanks for tuning in today, and have a great